Welcome to the third installment of This Day in History here on the Good Mike Work channel. I'm sorry it took me a whole month to get another one of these up, but I do plan to give you a couple of these in the month of February at least. Today we're going to talk about a very fond personal memory of mine and a pretty significant night in the history of pro wrestling and WWE. February 5th, 1988. This was the main event. This was essentially an episode of Saturday Night's Main Event, kind of set up the same way, except it aired in prime time, and I believe it aired on a Friday night. It drew an unbelievable rating. Upwards of 30 million people were watching this, because you got to remember, back then, there weren't a million networks and 300 cable channels and internet and TV and all of this. Your options were limited, so a lot of people who were watching this were probably just watching it because it was on one of the big three networks. So the audience for this thing was huge, and it was a big opportunity for the WWE to showcase themselves in front of the whole world on live TV. They had not done too many live television broadcasts up until this point, and a lot of really interesting things happened on this show. And you could also tell that they were in the infancy of doing live TV because there was a few technical difficulties and things like that. But this night was very significant for a lot of reasons. Number one, it was the infamous dual referee angle that they did when they took the belt off of Hulk Hogan after he had held the title for about almost 4 years, or over 4 years, I'm sorry. It emanated from the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana, and this was a jacked card. There was about 9 or 10 matches on this thing, all of which were dark matches except for 3 that were going to air on the live broadcast. And all 3 of those matches were huge angles and huge storylines and feuds in the WWE. You were going to have Macho Man Randy Savage challenging Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental title. You were also going to have the Hart Foundation getting a rematch against Strikeforce, who had recently defeated them for the WWE Tag Team title. And of course, you had Hogan and Andre. Jesse the Body Ventura and Vince McMahon were doing commentary for this thing as well. And they really did a good job, I think, of making this feel like a huge night, a big match feel to it. It was just an unbelievable, I just can't explain the atmosphere, how it felt experiencing this live as a kid watching it, especially when you knew big shit was going to go down. The funny thing is, I wasn't expecting Andre to beat Hogan. I was expecting Macho Man to beat Honky Tonk Man. But we'll start with that match first. This was actually going to be the blow-off of a big angle that started on Saturday Night's Main Event, ironically, back, I believe, in September of the previous year. It's one of my favorite Saturday Night's Main Events ever, where Honky Tonk Man defended the Intercontinental title against a recently turned babyface Macho Man Randy Savage, and that's when Randy started coming around with Elizabeth. He stopped treating her like shit. After the Hart Foundation interfered and cost Randy Savage winning the Intercontinental title, they started beating the shit out of him, and Honky Tonk Man was going to hit him over the head with the guitar, and Elizabeth stepped in his way and got in front of it, and he ended up shoving her down to the mat. She runs off and fetches Hulk Hogan, who comes back, and they clean house, and kind of the mega powers were born. And Randy Savage really got screwed out of that Intercontinental title opportunity. So after they feuded for a few more months, and you head into this big main event in February, you gotta think that Randy is going to finally win that Intercontinental title, because even though Honky had held the title for quite a while by this point, he was still viewed kind of as a joke of an Intercontinental champion. He was viewed as a guy who was holding the title because he was lucky, not because he was good, and he really got under the fans' skin. I could not stand him. I was never a fan of Honky Tonk Man's back then, even when he was babyface. I mean, he first came in, I think, in 85, 86 maybe. I mean, they were even still calling him Wayne Ferris, and he was a babyface. He was wearing the whole, Elvis Presley getup. He was the same fucking character, it's just he was cheesy, and he was happy, and he was glad to be there type of shit. Then he turned heel, got Jimmy Hart as his manager, and just kind of turned into this fucking douche, and I just never liked him. I couldn't wait to watch him lose the Intercontinental title to Savage. Now, to everyone's surprise, that didn't happen. Randy Savage won the match, but he won via countout, and I remember at the time just being baffled. I was really legitimately disappointed. Even though Randy Savage won, even though he lifted Elizabeth on his shoulders at the end of the match and, won over the hearts of millions, and he has finally accepted Elizabeth, and you could tell that they had a special love for each other, something you never saw when Savage was a heel. That was all a great moment and everything, and it was really kind of the end of the Honky Tonk Savage feud, but after all of that build, I can't believe that Savage did not wind up winning the title. I thought he should have. Now, the backstory on that, apparently, he was supposed to. I can't remember the details now, but I do remember specifically Honky Tonk Man having an issue and basically refusing to job to Savage that night. And that's some stuff that went on back then. Things were different back in the 80s and the 70s. You really had to protect yourself and look out for yourself, and for whatever reason, Honky Tonk Man felt that it wasn't going to be good business for him to lose the title that night, and he put up a stink, and I think he threatened not to compete or something. I don't know what he did, but he basically didn't want to lose, and they appeased him. They didn't make him lose the title. He lost the match, but Savage just won by countout or disqualification, whatever it was. It was kind of bullshit, and Honky would hold that title until SummerSlam, and then once he lost it to the Warrior, he wouldn't come anywhere near a championship belt again. I also remember the beginning of that match match, like I mentioned, some of their technical difficulties, it really sucked because the Macho Man's promo, you guys remember back during Saturday night's main events, they would always do the pre-match promos, which I loved. It was such a great part of the show. So many great memories, so many great promos. Randy Savage was such a huge character in the WWE, so charismatic, such a legend. And I think it sucks because when they did his promo before his match with the Honky Tonk Man, because it was live TV, over the television you could hear Honky Tonk Man's music playing in the ring while he was entering extremely loudly, and you really couldn't hear Randy Savage's promo. And I feel that it sucks because if you had 30-something million people watching this and WWE is trying to expose the general population to their characters and somebody great like Randy Savage, I think they were robbed of getting a great Randy Savage promo because it was completely drowned out by the incredibly loud, annoying Honky Tonk Man music. And being the huge Randy Savage fan that I was at the time, I can just remember being so disappointed that he would not win the Intercontinental title. But my disappointment would be very short-lived because the next matchup is for the WWE title, Hulk Hogan defending the title against Andre the Giant. Andre had waited almost a year since WrestleMania 3 to get back in the ring with Hulk Hogan. A lot had gone on in storyline between WrestleMania 3 and this main event match. Number one, Ted DiBiase was brought into the company. I think at the time he was probably working in UWF. I think he was in Japan for a little while around this time as well. Worked all over the territories, but he was brought in with this $1 Million Man gimmick, and almost immediately he's thrusted right into the main event storyline. He was only there a couple of months, before all of this started taking place, and he basically hired the services of Andre the Giant from Bobby the Brain Heenan. I think he purchased his contract. And there was a really famous episode of WWF Superstars that aired on Saturdays that would have been probably in late 1987 where, remember when they used to do the podium interviews, off to the side, with various announcers throughout the years, but Ted DiBiase and Virgil were there, and DiBiase said that he was going to purchase the WWE World Heavyweight title from Hulk Hogan. And that's kind of how the whole storyline kicked off. And of course, Hogan had to think about it. He took a couple of weeks to think about it because apparently the amount of money that Ted DiBiase offered Hulk Hogan was just astronomical. So Hogan is really considering it. And of course, he comes back on TV a couple of weeks later, does the interview, acts as if he's going to hand over the title to DiBiase, and then swerves us all and says, hell no, I'm not selling out, whatever. It was kind of a stupid angle because it wouldn't have even been legal. Even if this is pro wrestling, a lot of things are kind of tongue-in-cheek. That's stupid. You cannot just buy the heavyweight title from somebody else and then call yourself WWE champion. The president, Jack Tunney, at the time would not have allowed that to happen. So the fact that Hulk Hogan really had some big decision to make, no, he didn't. It wouldn't have been allowed anyway, but that's just me, being a little bit over-logical. This is wrestling we're talking about, and this is the 80s we're talking about, and shit was a lot more fun back then. And Hogan, because he did not sell his WWE title to Ted DiBiase, that's when DiBiase enlisted the services of Andre to win the title for him. And I thought it was really cool that WWE was giving us such a huge rematch. They're not saving it for WrestleMania 4. They're doing it right now on live TV in front of the world. Hogan had won the belt from the Iron Sheik in January of 1984. This was 4 years later. He held that title for so long. And I always wondered as a kid in the back of my mind, how was Hogan ever going to lose this thing? Under what circumstances would he lose? A lot of people were saying this could be Andre's opportunity. At the time, you didn't see it coming. You didn't know what the WWE's plan was. I had no idea that they were going to take the belt off of Hulk Hogan and do a tournament at WrestleMania 4. So they had this whole thing figured out, and the angle that they used to do it was pretty fucking hilarious. They brought in the Hebners. Dave might have already been there. Earl was working for Crockett. Earl is all over NWA's early, pay-per-views, the Starcades and War Games and things like that. He was working down there, and he just up and leaves. I don't know what the circumstances were, why he left, but he comes up to the WWE. Dave Hebner, who I think was already a regular official on WWE TV, was going to be the official for this match. And what they do is Andre nails Hogan with his little kind of double underhook side suplex type of thing, lands on Hogan, referee counts 1, 2, Hogan's shoulder clearly comes up, and the referee just keeps on counting. And in one of my favorite 10-second moments in the history of wrestling, to hear Howard Finkel do his classic Howard Finkel announcement, ladies and gentlemen, the winner of this match and new World Heavyweight Champion Andre the Giant. It's the only time we've ever heard those words spoken. It's the only time we've ever seen Andre the Giant with the world title on his shoulder. It was such an amazing moment and such an amazing night. And that was actually the debut, incidentally, of the Winged Eagle title. We had not seen it. That was the first night that it appeared. And it was funny, and another one of their weird technical things they did, and it was so poorly done because it was so obvious. I talked about Randy Savage's pre-match interview before. Well, Hogan had a pre-match interview as well. And I swear it's it's possible that this could have been taped maybe even weeks before. I mean, maybe the same day, but the way it looked, it could have been done weeks before. Number one, Hulk Hogan is completely jacked, sweaty, wet. He's got a bandana on his head. He's got sweat and grease all over his body, and he's wearing the old WWE title. And then as soon as his interview is over and his music starts playing, he comes out to the ring. All of the sweat and grease is gone. His hair is now completely dry and down. He's got no bandana on, and he's wearing the brand new Winged Eagle WWE Heavyweight title belt. It was kind of, it really didn't look right. So that's why part of me thinks, because of the size of Hulk Hogan and how jacked up he was, in that pre-match promo, he would have had to get himself so riled up earlier on in the day to look like that, only to come down off of it and have his match later on. It makes me think that they taped that interview at the previous set of Saturday Night's main event tapings a couple of months before this. But I remember noticing, too, the Winged Eagle title around Hogan's waist. I was like, what's up with the belt? And I was kind of squinting to see what it looked like. I'm like, wow, it's a different fucking belt. And it turned out to be my favorite belt the WWE has ever had. I remember not being used to it, at first, but by the time WrestleMania 4 came and went, I was all on board with the Winged Eagle title. But that new title belt had quite a debut. I mean, it got gangbanged that night. It was passed around. First, Hogan comes out wearing it, then Andre wins it, and then he hands it over to Ted DiBiase, and they put it around his waist. So that title, made its rounds in its first night in the business. Now, after the match, as Hogan is standing there in disbelief, Vince McMahon is losing his fucking mind on commentary. Jesse the Body Ventura is elated. He's bragging, I fucking told all of you that Andre was going to beat him. Vince McMahon says this is ridiculous. There's got to be an investigation. WWE President Jack Tunney needs to look into this. Hogan is crying and freaking out in the middle of the ring, and then he turns around to find two referees in the ring, both identical. And the storyline is that Dave Hebner was locked in a closet or something like that backstage, and they, I guess, gave a new guy plastic surgery or something like that to make him look like Dave Hebner, comes into the ring and officiates the match in their favor. Dave Hebner then gets out of the closet, runs out into the ring to confront the referee. The two of them start fighting. Hulk Hogan is sitting there in disbelief. He watches Earl beat the shit out of Dave and realizes that Earl was paid off. And in one of my favorite bumps ever, this is a very underrated bump, but Hulk Hogan grabs a hold of Earl, gorilla presses him over his head, and literally gets a running start from the other side of the ring and completely runs right over to the ropes and throws him as hard as he can into the pile of bodies, Andre the Giant, Ted DiBiase, and Virgil. I mean, Earl was caught. It looked like he was fine, but it looked pretty dangerous. I mean, Hogan threw him so far. It's just funny. Go back. I don't even know if this show's on the network. It might be. If not, you can probably find it on YouTube. If not, you can at least find the match on YouTube. But just an unbelievable referee bump, and Hogan just throws him. What that had to look like in the live crowd was probably pretty crazy. It reminded me of when, was it Bam Bam Bigelow? Who was it that tossed Spike Dudley like 10 rows in ECW? It kind of reminded me of that. But Earl only weighs 87 goddamn pounds. It wasn't like it was some huge feat of strength, but he took a hell of a bump that night. And welcome to the WWE, Earl Hebner. I'll never forget the backstage interview with Hogan after the match either. So he's back in the locker room with Mean Gene Okerlund, and he is crying like a bitch. I look back and watch it today, and I still laugh. Like, I know you have to be upset that you lost the title. I totally get that. Hogan is selling the hell out of it. He's actually doing a very good job. But the funny thing is he's whining and he's crying, and he sounds like such a sore fucking loser. Yes, he got ripped off. He had every reason to be pissed off, but he's literally moaning and groaning and literally crying. And it's just like, fuck it, for real? You're Hulk Hogan. Dust yourself off, get back on your fucking horse, and go out there and win your belt back. He was just going so over the top with it, and I just laugh. I just chuckle. Go back and watch the interview. He's just like, it's just the funniest fucking thing. But that would all lead, of course, to the big tournament at WrestleMania 4 that Randy Savage would wind up winning. I don't know if Savage was their original plan, because once the story of the Honky Tonk Man not wanting to do the job came out, you have to wonder, well, did they give Savage the title as plan B? Was Hogan going to lose it and then win it back at WrestleMania 4 and then they changed their mind? I don't know. But I don't care either. WrestleMania 4 was one of my favorite WrestleManias ever. Savage winning that tournament was so fucking awesome, and I'll take that any day over him beating Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental title. So I'm glad things worked out the way they did. What was interesting, too, I think in that WrestleMania main event, I'm pretty sure Earl Hebner was the referee for that thing, so they completely dropped the storyline with the twin referees. I can't remember why. Dave Hebner ended up gaining like a lot of weight, and he remained as an agent for the WWE for years, so he was always with the company. I think he just stopped refereeing after that point, and it was just Earl. And the whole storyline that had started just a month before was completely completely dropped by the time you got to WrestleMania 4, and Earl Hebner's in the ring refereeing the fucking main event. So it was a very big night for the WWE. I don't know if they got to show this big audience the product that they were hoping to show them. I mean, there were some big angles and some awesome shit took place, but at the end of the day, it was kind of a letdown in the Intercontinental title match. And of course, Hogan and Andre, this is Andre we're talking about. This is 1988 Andre we're talking about. He wasn't exactly Rey Mysterio Jr. in there. And Andre had a really difficult time even getting around. He even fell down once in the match when he tried to deliver like a boot to Hogan or a kick or something like that, and he kind of fell. You know, he was just very, very slow and old, and you could see he was winding down dramatically. So the fans that were watching that night weren't really treated to the greatest athleticism in the world, but still, it was a big angle and a big moment, and it took up a lot of time because the third match that they had planned didn't even get shown. To this day, I have never seen that whole match of Strikeforce versus the Hart Foundation. They started the match, they got about 30 seconds in, and they were out of time, and they had to sign off. I think NBC only gave them 1 hour. It would have been great if they could have had a 2-hour show and added maybe 1 or 2 matches and some more shit, but they got 1 hour in prime time was all they could do, and between the Intercontinental title match, which I think ran long, and then the World Heavyweight title match, there was no time for Strikeforce and Hart Foundation. I do know Strikeforce kept the belts that night, but I don't. I should check. I don't know if it's on the network. You guys can tell me. All I have is the live tape broadcast that I taped off of TV myself. I still have the fucking VHS tape. I've since transferred it to DVD and ripped it to my computer, so I still have it in its original form of live TV, but I never saw that Strikeforce and Hart Foundation match. And it's a shame. I wish they could have made time for that because the fans needed that. You know, the fans that were tuning in that night that might not necessarily be watching wrestling and were just watching it because it happened to be on, they needed to see some good athleticism and some good wrestling, but they didn't really get a chance to. They saw it from Savage, of course, in the opening match, but the Hogan and Andre match was more centered around the angle and the storyline and the circumstances that Hulk Hogan is no longer the WWE champion after 4 years. That was a pretty big deal. I mean, I guess that would explain why Hogan was crying like a little fucking bitch in the locker room. I mean, he just lost a title. He looked naked out there. I remember the first time seeing Hulk Hogan come out on TV after this whole thing took place. He didn't even look like himself. You just never saw him in the WWE without that title around his waist, because when he came in, back from the AWA, he came in December of 1983. 1 month later, he was the champion. So you never got a chance to see Hogan in the WWE, except for when he was a heel years before. But, you know, as a babyface, you know, he always had that title around his waist, and it was rare not to see him with it. So pretty smart move, I suppose, by the WWE. If you are going to take the belt off of Hulk Hogan after he's held it for so long, it should happen in front of a big audience, and it happened in front of the biggest audience in the history of the wrestling business. 33 fucking million people. That's unbelievable. So thanks for hanging out and listening to this little history lesson. If any of you were alive at this time and would like to share some memories about that night, feel free to in the comments section below. I will be back up here with a couple more of these in the month of February because I have a couple of dates in my mind. So until next time, peace.